sunny spaces, smiling faces, happy places. But every sunny space holds a shadow. Behind every smile are sharp teeth, and every happy place has something sinister lurking just below the surface.
Welcome to We Saw the Devil, the podcast diving deep into the chilling realms of true crime. Join your host Robin as she unravels mysteries that have left investigators baffled and armchair sleuths obsessed. Be forewarned, dear listener. We Saw the Devil is not for the faint of heart. Our unflinching exploration will take you to the darkest corners of the psyche and through the unimaginable depths of human darkness to unearth stark secrets to the harsh light of day. Nothing will be left untouched. Are you ready? Are you sure? We saw the devil.
Imagine this. Two young men from suburban Texas. One's 21, the other's 20. They're sitting in their parents' house in Allen and Argyle, nice little communities north of Dallas, middle class, probably had homecoming dates and high school graduation parties. And they were planning a military coup. Not in some video game, not in a Discord fantasy roleplay. They were planning to sail to a Caribbean island, murder every single man they could find, and enslave 87,000 women and children, and I'm quoting federal prosecutors here, sex slaves. They enrolled in fire academies, they joined the Air Force, they flew to Thailand, they learned Haitian Creole, they researched weapons, ammunition, and explosives. They made operational plans. They tried to recruit homeless people from Washington, D.C. to serve as their mercenary army. And they did all of this for nearly a year before federal agents knocked on their doors. This episode is the story of Gavin Weisenburg and Tanner Thomas, and a plot so insane, so deranged, so meticulously planned, and so deeply disturbing that even their own defense attorneys are calling it crazy, impossible, and absurd. Hi guys, I'm Robin. This is We Saw the Devil. And before we get into it, let's just get some really quick housekeeping out of the way, because I have to be honest, this is the singular most batshit story I have heard since I've done this podcast. And you guys know the history of this podcast. We covered the Lori Vallow case in depth. We've covered a bunch of insane things, but this absolutely takes the cake. So before we get into all of that, let's just get the quick housekeeping out of the way. Again, you're listening to We Saw the Devil. I'm Robin. If you're not, please follow the show on Instagram. That's the primary social platform for it. You can do that at We Saw the Devil Podcast. On Facebook and Twitter, it's We Saw the Devil. Website is wesawthedevil.com. And if you have any questions, complaints, concerns, any other C words, you can email me directly at info@wesawthedevil. Beyond that, there should be an episode of Red, White, and Bruised coming in the next day or two as well, because we are living on an absolutely bizarre timeline right now. Like, I cannot reconcile what I'm hearing and seeing. So, that being said, politics and the state of affairs in the US are getting a little crunk, so therefore I will be coming and doing an episode on it. I know you guys are just so excited. All right, guys, let's talk about this insane plot. And let's start with who the guys are, because that's the first question everyone asks when they hear about this case. Like, who was behind this? So Gavin Rivers Weisenburg is 21 years old. He's from Allen, Texas, which is a northern suburb of Dallas, known for its outlet mall and good schools. Literally, that's what it's known for. And it's the kind of place where families move for safe neighborhoods, decent property values, good schools for the kids. You know, one of those. Tanner Christopher Thomas is 20 years old. He's from Argyle, Texas, which is even smaller than Allen, has a population of about 4,000. And really the only thing happening there is it has a weekly farmer's market. Yeah. So apparently they were also bored. But the point being is that these aren't kids from broken homes in forgotten little corners of America. These are middle-class suburbs. These are places with Targets, Starbucks, Home Goods, youth soccer leagues, so on and so forth. And according to a federal grand jury indictment filed in the Eastern District of Texas last Thursday, these two men spent nearly a year planning to turn a Caribbean island into their own personal rape dungeon. And I don't think I've ever said the phrase rape dungeon on this podcast, but here we are. I guess there's a time for everything. The target? Gonave Island. And that's Haiti's largest satellite island. It sits about 30 miles northwest of Port-au-Prince in the Gulf of Gonâve. It's roughly 300 square miles, about the size of New York City, with a population estimated to be between 85,000 and 87,000 people. It's one of the poorest places in the Western Hemisphere. Infrastructure is minimal. The Haitian government has limited control there as well. Goes without saying, but gangs have significant influence. It's isolated, vulnerable, and prosecutors allege that's exactly why Weisenburg and Thomas chose it. According to the Justice Department, this wasn't just some drunken fantasy that got out of hand. This was methodically planned. This was a conspiracy that included, quote, research, reconnaissance, recruiting, planning, and seeking training to effectuate their plan. The goal? Military control of the entire island. The method? Murder every single man, capture every single woman and child. The purpose? And again, I'm quoting the U.S. Attorney's press release here, quote, carrying out their rape fantasies. Both of these men are now facing 2 federal charges. First, conspiracy to murder, maim, or kidnap in a foreign country. That carries a maximum sentence of life in a federal prison. And second, production of child pornography. That's 15 to 30 years. Their attorneys say they'll plead not guilty. More on that in a moment. But first, let's talk about how federal investigators say this all started and then unraveled. According to court documents, this conspiracy began in August 2024 and continued through July 2025. Nearly a full year of planning, preparation, and increasingly desperate attempts to acquire the skills necessary to pull off an armed invasion of a foreign territory. So let me walk you through this timeline because it reads like a fever dream written by someone who's watched way too many military movies. Someone like that, but they've actually never left their bedroom. So July through August of 2024, the planning begins. Federal prosecutors say Weisenburg and Thomas started planning their attack in August of 2024. They communicated about it on social media, messages that presumably now are in FBI evidence lockers. Around the same time, they began taking Haitian Creole language classes. Because, I mean, y'all, if you're going to stage a coup in Haiti, you should probably want to speak the language, right? I mean, I give them points for thoroughness with that. But it doesn't just stop there. They actually go all out. I have never seen dedication to crime and of this magnitude. So August 5th of 2024, Weisenburg enrolls in the North Texas Fire Academy in Rockwall, Texas. Why a fire academy, you might ask? Well, according to the indictment, he wanted training in command and control protocols, skills that prosecutors say would be useful for coordinating an armed military assault. Think about that. This kid, he's sitting in classes with people who want to save lives, run into burning buildings, save the baby, the dog, serve their communities, and he's there to learn how to organize a massacre. August 31st, 2024. On this date, prosecutors allege that Weisenburg and Thomas coerced a minor to engage in sexually explicit conduct on camera. This becomes the basis for their second federal charge, production of child pornography. Details about this charge are sparse in public documents, likely because the victim is a minor. January 7th, 2025, Tanner Thomas enlists in the United States Air Force. Now, let me be clear. Joining the military can be an honorable thing. Millions of Americans serve with distinction. But according to federal prosecutors, Thomas didn't join to serve his country. He joined to get free military training for his private war that he was planning. In a social media message to Weisenburg, which investigators now have, Thomas reportedly told his co-conspirator that he joined the Air Force specifically to further their planned attack on Haiti. The audacity of the caucasity, y'all. I mean, using American taxpayer dollars to train for an illegal invasion of a Caribbean island just so you can commit mass murder and mass rape. That was a plan, certainly. February 8th, 2025, after 6 months of training, Weisenburg fails out of the North Texas Fire Academy. Whatever skills he was hoping to acquire there, he did not receive them. He's like the little engine that could. He did not give up. February 20th, 2025, 2 weeks after washing out of fire training, Weisenburg books a flight to Thailand. His goal? Enroll in a sailing school to learn how to pilot the sailboat they plan to use to transport weapons, ammunition, and explosives to Haiti. He gets to Thailand, and he finds a sailing school. And then, plot twist, it's too expensive, so he doesn't enroll. So Weisenburg flies all the way to Southeast Asia to learn a skill critical to his invasion plan, and then he's too broke to do it. That's epic operational planning. March 14th, 2025, here's where it begins to get more calculated. Thomas is in the Air Force now, and his initial assignment is Ramstein, the air base in Germany. But prosecutors say he manages to get his assignment changed to Joint Base Andrews in Maryland. Why did he do that? Well, because Joint Base Andrews is right outside of Washington, D.C. And according to the indictment, Weisenburg and Thomas plan to recruit homeless people from the nation's capital to serve as their army. Guys, think about that for a minute. This kid enrolls in the Air Force and then changes his military assignment, moving from one of the Air Force's premier overseas bases to a stateside location just so he can facilitate recruiting houseless people to die in an illegal foreign invasion. Are we good? Okay, let's continue. March through July of 2025, they're still planning. Prosecutors say Weisenburg and Thomas continued planning at this time. They researched weapons and ammunition. They looked into purchasing military-type rifles. They made operational and logistical plans for the invasion. And they also continued recruiting, or trying to recruit, others to join their cause. On July 3rd, 2025, Gavin Weisenburg is arrested. The public record doesn't specify exactly when or how Tanner Thomas was taken into custody, but by November 1st, both men were indicted by a federal grand jury. And the question that everyone wants answered is, how did the FBI find out? Well, the Justice Department hasn't said, but given that this involved social media communications, attempts to recruit multiple people, enrollment in public training programs, and military service, there were plenty of opportunities for someone to notice that something was very, very, very wrong with them and report it. Maybe it was a classmate at a fire academy who heard something. Maybe it was someone they tried to recruit who went to police. Maybe it was military investigators who flagged Thomas's suspicious behavior. We don't know yet, but federal agents were watching them and they moved before these two men could buy that sailboat and start loading it with weapons. And what was their exact plan? Because the plan, when you hear it on its face, sail to an island, kill all the men, enslave the women and children, that's a lot. But let's talk about what the actual plan was. Because even by criminal conspiracy standards, this is spectacularly insane. According to the federal indictment, the goal was to take military control of the island of Gonâve by murdering all of the men and capturing all the women. All of the men on an island with 87,000 people. Here are two guys from the Texas suburbs, one whom failed out of the fire academy and the other who'd been in the Air Force for maybe 6 months, planning to murder tens of thousands of people and capture tens of thousands more, with a mercenary army recruited from Washington, D.C.'s homeless population. The indictment says they plan to recruit and hire homeless people to serve as the military force. Then they would buy a sailboat, load it with firearms, ammunitions, explosives, recruit their homeless army, sail to Haiti, stage a coup, and establish military control over the entire island. So let's start with the mercenary army, recruiting homeless people as soldiers. Prosecutors say that this was the core part of their plan, which is why Thomas changed his Air Force assignment. And that's just so foul. You're approaching people who are already in crisis, people without stable housing, often dealing with mental health issues or substance abuse, trauma, and you're trying to convince them to what? Get on a sailboat with the two 20-year-olds they've never met, sail to the Caribbean, invade a country, and participate in mass murder? Like, what's the pitch there exactly? I want to know what their pitch would have been like on Shark Tank for that. What are you offering them? Money? Where's that coming from? You couldn't even get into sailing school. And let's say you somehow convince a handful of desperate people to go along with this insanity. You still have to get them to Haiti. You have to train them, feed them, house them, arm them. I mean, it's not a plan so much as it's just a delusion. The sailboat? They couldn't even afford to learn how to drive the sailboat. How are you going to buy a whole ass sailboat? One capable of carrying many, many, many people plus weapons and all of that. And that's not a casual weekend trip. It's hundreds of nautical miles through open ocean. But sure, two kids from Texas were absolutely going to pull that off. The indictment also says that they researched ammunition, including weapons, military-style rifles, but there's no indication that they actually purchased any hardware in that. Even if they had the money, which again, no evidence they had anything whatsoever, how were they planning to legally transport that to Haiti? Obviously they wouldn't be doing that legally. And once they got to Haiti, assuming they somehow made it, they'd be facing an island where gang control is significant. Everyone has a weapon. People know how to fight because they've been fighting for survival for many years. Weisenburg and Thomas had 6 months of fire academy? Failed. And then a few months of Air Force basic training against an island of 87,000 people. And let's just pretend for a moment. Let's just pretend that they were somehow successful in their goal. Then what? They murdered all the men. Then what? They're now attempting to control 40 to 50,000 women and children, people who just watch their fathers, brothers, sons, husbands, friends murdered in front of them. How do you maintain control over tens of thousands of people? The Haitian government isn't just going to shrug and say, oh, well, I guess Gonave Island belongs to 2 American kids now. Cool. Anyway, that's not going to happen. And also, the US government isn't going to ignore an illegal military invasion by American citizens. Third, the international community sure as shit isn't going to stand by while mass rape and slavery happen 30 minutes from the capital of Haiti. This wasn't a plan. This was just a violent sexual fantasy dressed up. They were cosplaying this, and it's really absolutely heinous and disgusting. Did they actually believe that they could pull this off? I mean, that's terrifying in itself, right? Or was the planning itself the point? Was it the fantasy of power, domination, control over vulnerable people? Was that the real goal, and the actual invasion was just the excuse to keep this fantasy exciting and alive? I don't know, but the psychological evaluation of these 2 idiots is going to be something. And I'm not trying to make light or joke about this because it is deathly serious. Can you imagine if they actually... It's so absurd, I can't even, in my right mind, pretend to think that this would ever be a thing that happened. But they took real actions. They made real plans. They spent real money. They attempted to recruit real people, and they researched real weapons. And according to prosecutors, they also produced real child pornography. And whatever was in their heads, they were moving toward making it real. Thank God someone stopped them. November 24th. What's going on now? Well, Gavin Rivers Weisenburg and Tanner Christopher Thomas have been indicted on 2 federal charges. Again, conspiracy to murder, maim, or kidnap in a foreign country, and production of child pornography. Both men have attorneys, and both attorneys say their clients will plead not guilty. David Finn, Weisenburg's attorney, released a statement that's interesting. He told NPR and other outlets, quote, I encourage everyone to hold their horses and stay tuned. An indictment is simply an allegation. And while there is some truth to the allegations, I believe that it will become clear what actually did not, and could not have happened. I believe it will become clear what actually did not, and could not have happened. If your initial response to the governor's press release was, that sounds crazy, impossible, and absurd, you might be onto something important. And if you think about it, that is a fascinating defense strategy. He's essentially saying, yes, some of this is true, but it's also crazy, impossible, and absurd. So please reserve judgment. John Helms, Thomas's attorney, was more straightforward. He told reporters that Thomas will plead not guilty and that his team will be defending him vigorously against these charges. Helms said that he also thinks prosecutors, quote, are going to have a real hard time proving that Weisenburg and Thomas actually intended to carry out the plot. And you know what? That is probably their best argument. The conspiracy charge requires proof that the defendants intended to commit that crime, and then took substantial steps toward doing so. The defense will likely argue that this was all fantasy, all talk, all internet tough guy bullshit posturing, and that Weisenburg and Thomas never actually did genuinely believe that they could or would invade Haiti. They'll point to the failures, like Weisenburg washing out of the fire academy, not enrolling in sailing school because of the cost. There was no evidence that they actually purchased weapons. There's no evidence that they actually recruited anyone. They'll argue that joining the Air Force, taking Creole classes, researching weapons, that none of that proves intent to commit mass murder. It just proves these were 2 young men with disturbed fantasies who never took the final steps toward making these fantasies real. But here's the problem with that defense. They took a lot of steps, nearly a year's worth. And prosecutors have their communications. Social media messages where Thomas allegedly told Weisenburg he joined the Air Force specifically to further their invasion plan. That's absolutely consciousness of guilt. That's evidence of intent. And then there's the child pornography charge. That's not fantasy. That's not role play. that's a real crime with a real victim. And it happened on August 31st, 2024, right in the middle of their alleged conspiracy. If prosecutors can prove that charge, and they must have some pretty solid evidence to bring it, it establishes a pattern. It shows that these two guys just weren't shit talking online. They were willing to victimize real people, including children, to satisfy their sexual gratification. That undermines any defense argument that, quote, they never would have really done it. They already did something. And that something was pretty fucking horrible. So the question is, I mean, for sane people, how much more would they have done if they hadn't been stopped? But let's zoom out for a second, because this case raises some deeply troubling questions about radicalization, fantasy, and violence in the internet age. The language in this case, rape fantasies, that's the goal of enslaving women and children as sex slaves. The language in this case, rape fantasies, sex slaves, this is textbook incel ideology. For those somehow unfamiliar or have been living under a rock, incel stands for involuntary celibate. It started off as an online support community for people struggling with loneliness and romantic rejection, and by people, I mean men, because of course. But over the past decade, it's morphed into something gross, dark, violent. There's a toxic subculture that views women as objects, relationships as nothing more than transactions, and sexual access is a right to them as men that's been unjustly denied. At its most extreme, incel ideology leads to violence. We've seen it before with Elliot Rodger in California. Then you had Alec Minassian in Toronto, the Plymouth shooting in the UK. Men who believed that they were entitled to women's bodies, and then when women rejected them, they turned to mass violence. But this case is different. Weisenburg and Thomas didn't plan to attack a sorority or drive a van through a crowded street. They planned to conquer a whole island, to establish a fiefdom where they'd have absolute power over tens of thousands of women and children. This isn't just incel violence. This is like incel colonialism. And that's fucking scary. And then you have to think, okay, how did two young men from suburban Texas develop fantasies this fucked up? I guarantee you I put my life on it. Somewhere in their digital history, you're going to find Discord servers, Reddit forums, 4chan threads, private chats, like a trail of increasingly extreme content. Maybe memes about conquering women, discussions about societal collapse, taking what's ours, maybe something specific planning. The internet has created spaces where violent fantasies are normalized, where they're encouraged, refined. Young men can and do find communities that tell them that their rage is justified, their desires are reasonable, your plans, whatever they are achievable. And the scary part, thankfully, most of them will never act on it. They'll just spend years stewing in this toxic cesspool, engaging with others, maybe small acts of harassment or abuse here and there, which is equally awful, but nothing quite like mass murder and mass rape. But a few will take it seriously. A few will start making plans. And a few will enroll in the academies and join the Air Force and fly to Thailand. And if we're lucky, if someone notices and reports it, then they'll be stopped before they hurt anyone. And if we're not lucky, well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens. And one thing that really kind of piqued my interest with this case is there's another layer here, which is they chose Haiti. Not a random deserted island, not some hypothetical place from their imagination. Haiti, a real country, a black country, one of the poorest nations in the Western Hemisphere, still recovering from centuries of exploitation, that devastating, awful earthquake, political instability, gang violence. They looked at a population of vulnerable people who have been suffering for decades, already struggling, and thought, sweet, perfect, easy targets. That's not just misogyny, right? Of them wanting to mass enslave and rape women. That's not just mass misogyny. That's racism. That's imperialism. That's the same colonialist mentality that exploited Haiti for centuries. Now, just brand new and repackaged as sexual fantasy by two idiots who've probably never even experienced an actual moment of hardship in their real lives. They quite literally wanted to play conquistador. They wanted to be warlords. They wanted to act out these scenarios on real human beings that they obviously viewed as less than human. And what's wild is that the people of Gonave Island will probably never know that they came. I want to say close, but it really was not close. But the people there probably have no idea of what was transpiring. Maybe it's in the news there. I'm not sure. But it's like preventing a school shooting where the community learns about the threat after the fact, right? Sure, the victims don't exist. The trauma didn't happen. The violence was prevented. Cool, cool, cool. But it was real in the minds of Weisenburg and Thomas. Those people were real to them, real enough to plan around, real enough to learn their whole language, real enough to train to dominate them. And I just find something so profoundly disturbing about that. You know, like think about how you could be living your life, just going to work, coming home, being with your kids, and then somewhere on the other side of the world could be someone planning your death and enslavement. And you would never know, you know, and that's the world we live in. So Gavin Weisenburg and Tanner Thomas are awaiting trial in Texas now. They face up to life in prison on the conspiracy charge and 15 to 30 on the child pornography charge. Their attorneys say they'll plead not guilty, and there will be a trial. A jury, evidence presented, testimony given, the legal system will do what it does. But regardless of the outcome, we're still kind of sitting here left with the fundamental question, how the hell did we get here? How did we reach a point where two young men from suburban rural Texas could spend nearly a year planning to murder and enslave an entire island population? The first warning signs were what exactly? Failing out of the fire academy? That happens every day. Not enrolling in sailing school that you can't afford? That happens every day. What radicalized them? What enabled them? What community or ideology or content pipeline led them down this path? And how many others are out there right now in their bedrooms, on their computers, on their phones, planning similar attacks? The FBI stopped Weisenburg and Thomas, but they can't stop ideas. You know, that's on us as a society, as communities, as people who give a damn about preventing violence before it actually does happen. We need to pay attention here to the warning signs, to the language, to the ideologies that dehumanize and objectify and normalize violence, because the next Gavin Weisenburg or Tanner Thomas is out there right now planning something. But will we notice it in time? Thankfully, this entire plan was so asinine and ridiculous that it didn't really stand a chance. But I actually recorded a whole new episode last night, kind of a news update on a handful of cases in the news right now. And the website that I was on, I was looking, it's just, you know, a grid pattern with different headlines and thumbnails. Every single one, every single story, and there were about 30 on this page, is about a man randomly assaulting and, you know, sexually assaulting and murdering a random person. It was about husbands killing their wives and children. It was about serial killers. It was just every single story, all 30. It was men committing acts of violence against women. I actually made the episode to talk about the Slender Man case because I think, as everyone is aware, Morgan Geyser, the stabber in the Slender Man case, escaped from her group home, and that was kind of big news. So I was doing an episode to cover that story and then saw this one, and then also Morgan was found as well. Absolutely insane, guys. But I'm going to be watching this case. I want to know more. Like, I want to know what goes on in their heads. Sometimes I just really, really don't understand people or things. But anyway, I will be dropping a news episode. It will be Patreon only. So for those of you who are part of the Patreon, look forward to a Patreon only news episode coming in the next couple days. Again, guys, you've been listening to We Saw the Devil. This is Robin. If you're not, please follow the show on Instagram. You can do so at We Saw the Devil Podcast. On Facebook and Twitter, you can find We Saw the Devil. Website is wesawthedevil.com. You can email me anytime at info@wesawthedevil.com. And then you can find the show on Patreon if you want to financially support the show. But anyway, I will have a new Patreon episode and then also a new Red, White, and Bruised episode coming in the next couple days. So until then, guys, until next crime.